And so we arrive at Introduction 4, Buddhism. Before the Muslim conquest of India, the 11th century of the Common Era, the teaching of Buddha exerted considerable influence in Eastern Persia and Transoxania. We hear of flourishing Buddhist monasteries in Balkh, the metropolis of ancient Bactria, a city famous for the number of Sufis who resided in it. Professor Goldzahar has called attention to the significant circumstance that the Sufi ascetic Ibrahim ibn Adham appears in Muslim legend as a prince of Balkh who abandoned his throne and became a wandering dervish. The story of Buddha, over again, the Sufis learned the use of rosaries from Buddhist monks, and without entering into details, it may be safely asserted that the method of Sufism, so far as it is one of ethical self-culture, ascetic meditation, and intellectual abstractions, owes a good deal to Buddhism, but the features which the two systems have in common only accentuate the fundamental difference between them. In spirit, they are poles apart. The Buddhist moralizes himself. The Sufi becomes moral only through the knowing and loving God. Now, in Islam, a person can be moral. Not moral because they've decided these are the ethics I'm going to follow, but it goes beyond socially and internally contrived, basically invented or, invented according to their own whims sorts of things. The Sufi conception of the passing away fana of individual self and universal being is certainly, I think, of Indian origin. Again, no, you have sayings of the Prophet in Shia and Sunni narrations. I think of Indian origin, its first great exponent was the Persian mystic, Bayezid of Bistam, who may have received it from his teacher, Abu Ali of Scindi. Here are some of his sayings. Creatures are subject to changing states, but the Gnostic has no state because his vestiges are effaced and his essence annihilated by the essence of another, and his traces are lost in another's traces. 30 years, the high God was my mirror. Now I am my own mirror, i.e., according to the explanation given by his biography, that which I was, I am no more, for I and God is a denial. The unity of God, since I am no more, the high God is his own mirror. I went from God to God until they cried, from me and me, O thou I. This, it will be observed, is not Buddhism, but the pantheism of the Vedanta. Well, Sir Al-Ikhlas, without saying that there are multiple gods or that everything is God, certainly pantheism or pantheism in for referring to everything divine, pantheism in just saying that God is in everything, but that everything is not, the creation. God's not like anything and anything. This last chapter says, the last verses in that chapter says, 112, we cannot identify fana with nirvana unconditionally. Both terms imply the passing away of individuality, while nirvana is purely negative. Fana is accompanied by baka, everlasting life in God. The rapture of the Sufi has lost himself in ecstatic contemplation of the divine beauty is entirely opposed to the passionless intellectual serenity of the Arahat. I emphasize this contrast because, in my opinion, the influence of Buddhism on Muslim thought has been exaggerated. There are certainly Sufi orders that have appeared as a result of Buddhism being popular in the area and the area becoming Muslim. Much is attributed to Buddhism that is Indian rather than specifically Buddhistic. The fana theory of the Sufis is a case in point. Ordinary Muslimin held the followers of Buddha in abhorrence, regarding them as idolaters. Well, if they worshipped idols, they were, but it's not up to opinion or moral judgment. If they're idol worshippers, if they're not idol worshippers, whatever. And we're not likely to seek personal intercourse with them. On the other hand, for nearly 1,000 years before the Muslim conquest, Buddhism had been powerful in Bactria and Eastern Persia generally. It must therefore have affected the development of Sufism in those regions. While fana is, in its pantheistic form, is radically different from nirvana, the terms coincide so closely in other ways that we cannot regard them as being altogether unconnected. Fana has an ethical aspect and involves the extinction of all passions and desires. The passing away of evil qualities and of the evil actions which they produce is said to be brought about by the continuance of the corresponding good qualities and actions. Compare this with the definition of nirvana given by Professor Price Davids. The extinction of that sinful, grasping condition of mind and heart, which would otherwise be, according to the great mystery of karma, be the cause of renewed individual existence. That extinction is to be brought about by and runs parallel with the growth of the opposite condition of mind and heart, and it is complete when that opposite condition is reached. Apart from the doctrine of karma, which is alien to Sufism, well, again, Surah 99 then and other passages indicate very thing that every good and every evil, faces its result, and other things too, These definitions of Fana, viewed as a moral state, and Nirvana agree almost word for word. It would be out of place to pursue the comparison further, but I think we may conclude that the Sufi theory of Fana was influenced to some extent by Buddhism as well as Perso-Indian pantheism. Now, if you have a partial view of Islam, you're going to think that this was necessary. Again, these things were, at least the traditions that passed on the sayings of the Prophet had these things. The receptivity of Islam to foreign ideas has been recognized by every unbiased inquirer. The history of Sufism is only a single instance of this general rule, but this fact should not lead us to seek in such ideas an explanation of the whole question which I am now discussing, or to identify Sufism itself with the extraneous ingredients which it has absorbed and assimilated in the course of its development. Even if Islam had been miraculously shut off from contact with foreign religions and philosophies, some form of mysticism would have arisen within it, for the seeds were already there. Well, inherent Islam didn't, mysticism was part of it. It wasn't just you show up and you do and don't do things that are considered crimes and, are not crime. You don't do things that are considered crimes that are to be punished, and those that would be extolled by the community you do. There's always more to Islam than that. Of course, we cannot isolate the internal forces working in this direction, since they were subject to the law of spiritual gravitation. The powerful currents of thought discharged through the Muslim world by the great non-Islamic systems above mentioned gave a stimulus to various tendencies within Islam, which affected Sufism either positively or negatively. As we've seen, its oldest type is an ascetic revolt against luxury and worldliness. Later on, the prevailing rationalism and skepticism provoked counter movements towards intuitive knowledge and emotional faith, and also an orthodox reaction, which in its turn drove many earnest Muslimin into the ranks of the mystics. How, it may be asked, could a religion founded on the simple and austere monotheism of Muhammad tolerate these new doctrines, much less make terms with them? While Muhammad taught to seek knowledge, though it be in China or India, and various other things. It's the scope of what we're going over is to, we don't have time for that here. It would seem impossible to reconcile the transcendent personality of Allah with an eminent reality, which is the very life and soul of the universe. No, hence the qualities al-Haq, al-Muntakim, al-Mutakabbir, 319 things, or if you pick a list of 99, whatever, Yet Islam has accepted Sufism. Well, it hasn't said that Ibadi and Shia and Sunni, the first sects, you could say, are necessary, and Islam doesn't per se accept sects, it accepts the good and truth of all, regardless of what title you have for yourself. But the Sufis, instead of being excommunicated, are surely securely established in the Muslim society, and the legend of the Muslim saints record the wildest excesses of Oriental pantheism. Again, where people went outside, it was because there was religious freedom, and if Islam condemned something and people knew Islam condemned something, they didn't necessarily go in and enforce this, that, or the other. Let us return for a moment to Al-Quran, that infallible touchstone by which every Muslim theory and practice must be proved. Are there gems of mysticism to be found there? Obviously there's different types of meditation listed. The Quran, as I have said, starts with the notion of Allah, the one eternal and almighty God, far above human feelings and aspirations. The Lord of his slaves, not the father of his children, a judge meting out stern justice to sinners and extending his mercy to those who avert his wrath by repentance, humility, and unceasing works of devotion, and a God that goes beyond that in his grace, and without pulling special stunts. Certainly fathers and mothers are limited by their love, and a God of fear rather than of love. Well, actually, love is mentioned more in the Quran, and fear is mentioned less than the Bible. So it's just something that people like to repeat until, even the Muslims are believing it, that have it right in front of them. Oh, 56 times. Oh, 56 is a much smaller number than 11 plus 4, right? No, it's not. That's what type of person would fall for that? This is one side, and certainly the most prominent side of Muhammad's teaching. Well, if you love me, keep my commandments is something taught by Muhammad too, but more explicitly. So whichever your psychological type is going to lead you towards one thing or the other. But while he set an impassable gulf between the world and Allah, is deeper, by saying that God is closer than your jugular vein, and God becomes between you and your heart, and we are the mean. Whatever good we've done, God is using us the mean. So God's, sort of closer to what the Avatar doctrine, you could say, without the misassociation or idolatry or whatever people want to call it. But while he said a impassable gulf between the world, his deeper instinct craved a direct revelation from God to the soul. Yeah, no one's a prophet because they've just got ideas and think this things would be better. That's not the same thing as a prophet. A prophet is a spiritual gift. And direct revelation from God, the prophets that God calls, that God sanctions, that's what's going on. And inspirations too. There are no contradictions in logic of feeling. Muhammad, who had something of the mystic, felt God as both far and near, both as transcendent and immanent. In the latter aspect, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth, a being who works in the world and in the soul of man. If my servants acts about me, lo, I am near. Al-Quran 282. We, using the royal we, of course, are nearer to him than his own neck vein, 50:15. And in the earth are signs to those of real faith, and in yourselves. What do ye not see? 51:20-21. It was a long time ere they saw the Muslim consciousness, haunted by terrible visions of the wrath to come, slowly and painfully awoke to the significance of those liberating ideas. The verses which I have quoted do not stand alone, and however unfavorable to mysticism, Al-Quran as a whole may be, I cannot assent to the view that it supplies no basis for a mystical interpretation of Islam. This was worked out in detail by the Sufis who dealt with Al-Quran in very much the same way as Philo treated the Pentateuch. But while the Quran, Surah 3:7 indicates there is different layers of meaning for those with knowledge, whether they've experienced that knowledge through looking at the simile or experiencing, or but they would not have succeeded so thoroughly in bringing over the mass of religious Muslimin to their side unless the champions of orthodoxy, as it was so called, had set about constructing a system of scholastic philosophy that reduced the divine nature to a purely formal, changeless, and absolute unity. Well, not merely, but purely. And you can figure that out by thinking of God being the best in all of what's best, Absolutely. A bare will devoid of all affections and emotions, a tremendous and incalculable power, which no human creature could have any communion or personal intercourse whatsoever. That is the God of Muslim theology. No, if you strip the family thing, maybe it is even more personal rather than having to put it in certain specific roles. It goes beyond that. It involves itself in more of the creation that you're a witness and a part of and that you're working. Because you are beyond your roles. You're beyond your body. That's understood further by that. That was the alternative to Sufism. Therefore, all thinking religious Muslimin are mystics, as Professor D.B. MacDonald, one of our best authorities on the subject, has remarked. And he adds, all too are pantheists, but some do not know it. Now, they're not pantheists in saying that everything is divine, everything, God, we know God through creation, we know God through ourselves. So the book of nature and the book of ourselves teach us something. It's not just the revealed book. But that's, mainstream Islam. And people who pigeonhole things may not get that. The relation of individual Sufis to Islam varies more or less. Entire conformity to a merely nominal profession of belief in Allah and His Prophet. No, whether they're still Muslim or not, they tend to mean it. While Al-Quran and the traditions are generally acknowledged to be the unalterable standard of religious truth, this acknowledgement does not include the recognition of any external authority which shall decide what is orthodox and what is heretical. Creeds and catechisms count for nothing in the Sufis' estimation. So they're fundamentalists. Why should he concern himself with these? When he possesses a doctrine derived immediately from God, as he reads Al-Quran with studious meditation and rapt attention, lo, the hidden meanings, infinite and inexhaustible, of the holy word flash upon his inward eye. This is what the Sufis call istinbat, a sort of intuitive deduction, the mysterious inflow of divinely revealed knowledge into hearts made pure by repentance and filled with the thought of God, and the outflow of that knowledge upon the interpreting tongue. Naturally, the doctrines elicited by means of istinbat do not agree very well with either with Muhammad theology or with each other. But the discord is easily explained. Theologians who interpret the letter cannot be expected to reach the same conclusions as mystics who interpret the spirit. And if both classes differ among themselves, that is a merciful dispensation of divine wisdom, since theological controversy serves to extinguish religious error, while the vanity of mystical truth corresponds to the manifold degrees and modes of mystical experience. In the chapter on the Gnosis, I shall enter more fully into the attitude of the Sufis towards positive religion. It is only a rough and ready account of the matter to say that many of them have been good Muslimin, many scarcely Muslim at all, and a third party, perhaps the largest, Muslimin after a fashion. During the early Middle Ages, Islam was a growing organism and gradually became transformed under the influence of diverse movements, of which Sufism itself was one. Muslim orthodoxy in its present shape owes much to Ghazali, and Ghazali was a Sufi. Through his work and example, the Sufistic interpretation of Islam has no small measure been harmonized with the rival claims of reason and tradition. By just because of this, he is less valuable than mystics of a purer type to the student who wishes to know what Sufism essentially is. Although the numerous definitions of Sufism which occur in Arabic and Persian books on the subject are historically interesting, their chief importance lies in showing that Sufism is undefinable. Jalaluddin Rumi in his Masnavi tells a story about an elephant which some Hindus were exhibiting in a dark room. Many people gathered to see it, but as the place was too dark to permit them to see the elephant, they all felt it with their hands to gain an idea of what it was like. One felt its trunk and said that the animal resembled a water pipe. Another felt its ear and said it must be a large fan. Another its leg and thought it must be a pillar. Another felt its back and declared that the beast must be like an immense throne. So it is with those who define Sufism. They can only attempt to express what they themselves have felt, and there's no conceivable formula that will compromise every shade of personal and intimate religious feeling, since, however these definitions illustrate with convenient brevity certain aspects and characteristics of Sufism, a few specimens may be given. Sufism is this: that actions should be passing over the Sufi, i.e. being done upon him, which are known to God only, and that he should always be with God in a way that is known to God only. Sufism is wholly self-discipline. Sufism is to possess nothing and to be possessed by nothing. Sufism is not a system composed of rules or sciences, but a moral disposition, i.e., if it were a rule, it could be made one's own by strenuous exertion. And if it were a science, it could be acquired by instruction, but on the contrary, it is a disposition according to the saying, form yourselves on the moral nature of God. And the moral nature of God cannot be attained either by means of rules or means of sciences. Sufism is freedom and generosity and absence of self-constraint. It is to this that God should make thee die to thyself and should make thee live in him. To behold the imperfection of the phenomenal world, nay, to close the eye to everything imperfect in contemplation of him who is remote from all imperfection, that is Sufism. Sufism is control of the faculties and observance of the breaths. It is Sufism to put away what thou hast in thy head, to give what thou hast in thy hand, and not to recoil from whatsoever befalls thee. The reader will perceive that Sufism is a word uniting many divergent meanings, and that in sketching its main features, one is obliged to make a sort of composite portrait which does not represent any particular type exclusively. The Sufis are not a sect. They have no dogmatic system. The tarkas, or paths by which they seek God, are in number as the souls of men, and vary infinitely, though a family likeness may be traced in them all. Description of such a protean phenomenon must differ wildly from one another, and the impression produced in each case will depend on the choice of materials and the prominence given this or that aspect of the many-sided whole. Now, the essence of Sufism is best displayed in its extreme type, which is pantheistic and speculative rather than ascetical or devotional. This type, therefore, I have purposely placed in the foreground. The advantage of limiting the field is obvious enough, but entails some loss of proportion. In order to form a fair judgment of Muslim mysticism, the following chapters should be supplemented by a companion picture drawn especially from those modern types, which for want of space I've unduly neglected. And so it's said that there will be 72 sects. And so those sects we can view as psychological types. Now, if you turn your psychology in whatever type, or however much you're one type or the other, and how that blends unto God, then you don't form a sect. If you're not letting yourself be too moved by conservatism or liberalism and try to just turn straight to the text. And but Islam is devotion. It's a surrender unto God. It's a submission unto God. Hence the term. God is implied, of course, in the word Islam. So Sufism is connected to that, but not always the same thing.